Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm really excited to be presenting today alongside Nathan Budd from IDC. We're going to be talking about making the case for change in a world that doesn't stop changing, which has obviously been a recurring theme throughout this entire conference so far. Nathan, if you can move on to the agenda. So today we're going to be sharing brand new research, like literally just published this morning from IDC and Cantata, where we're going to touch both on the benefits of PSA adoption, which is the point of the research that was published this morning, but also ongoing research we're working on, where we're taking a novel approach to understanding the business value erosion that comes from not adopting a PSA at a juncture where one is needed to support the trajectory of the business. And we'll get more into this idea of a self-reinforcing death spiral. That is a specific quote from the research that Nathan will get into. We'll talk about the idea of a shifting baseline. And fundamentally, we want to give people a new way to think about ROI and cost of inaction. So if we move to the next slide, I want to get into why this matters, which is establishing a common language for impact. I'm going to hand off to Nathan soon. He's going to be doing the lion's share of the work today. Actually, go back to the why this matters slide. First, I want to focus on why this matters. This won't be a dry data readout. I want this to be helpful to both customers attending today and those who are attending who may not be using a PSA yet and are thinking of making a change and wondering whether they should. On a case study interview I did last year, I asked a customer what advice they'd give to someone considering adopting PSA, and they told me fervently, passionately, if you're serious about professional services, you have to invest in a PSA. It's a hygiene measure. You cannot be a serious professional services organization and not do it, which aligns with SPI, who we're going to be talking with tomorrow, who have long recommended that any PS organization with over 20 employees be using a PSA. Now, I'm going to say right up front, I know I'm likely preaching to the choir. You are either the converted or probably the wannabe converted. But A, you're not done articulating the specific benefits of PSA drives once you've made an investment decision in PSA. In fact, you've just begun. And B, the reality from the pulpit is that a lot of businesses that need a PSA don't have one in spite of advocates in the business spreading the gospel. And that's for a lot of reasons, reasons that can also make it hard for current PSA users to push for what's next. Namely, that the pull of inertia is strong. New Cantata research that's upcoming shows that the top reason organizations aren't using a PSA is the cost of adopting a new solution. More than half have that as the reason, which can be remedied with the right business case. But what does the right business case look like? In today's session, we want to arm all of you with a common language to talk about the impact that a PSA has, so that the next time you're asked about it, whether it be for a renewal conversation or pushing for the next phase of adoption and transformation or a first-time investment, you know what types of benefits it drives and what types of risks you're avoiding. You know what to talk about and how to frame those things. So if we move to the next slide, let's adapt this image of a crossroads that we've been seeing throughout the conference into an illustration of what the opportunity cost of inaction might look like. Every business is on a journey to where the business needs to be in 2 to 5 years' time. Even if you're not exactly sure what that journey needs to look like, someone in your C-suite or your board probably does, right? In order to exit by 2029, we need to do X, we need to improve EBITDA by Y, we need to reduce Z. And I want to be sure that people don't think of this upward trajectory that we're painting here towards optimal performance solely as a revenue growth journey. Not everyone's on that journey. This is whatever needs to happen on the road to optimal performance for your organization. We've heard about a lot of things that the road to PS 2.0 and AI maturity will be paved with throughout Converge. So what aspects of those are going to need to be reckoned with in your organization in order to navigate the road ahead? The question then is not how much PSA can improve utilization or margin. It's part of the question. It's what barriers to that optimal trajectory your business needs to be on, what organizational bottlenecks that, if left as part of the status quo, will constrain, if not degrade performance, does PSA or the next phase of PSA adoption eliminate? So my last slide before we do a quick poll and then I hand to Nathan, if we move on. This is a critical part of painting a before and after story that's needed to build a powerful business case, which is something we spell out in our How to Build a Compelling Business Case guide you can see on the screen. This is not just about plugging the benefits of adoption to stand up an ROI. It's understanding your current state and then projecting, positing into the future what the impact of not making any change over the next few years will have. Because if your plan is to say grow 3x over this time frame, and you're going to do it with a spreadsheet owning a critical process, what impact is that going to have? You're not just foregoing the advertised benefits, which many people, including me, I won't lie, I can talk about the benefits all day, are going to tell you about. All the evidence in the world exists that those benefits are powerful, but you're also risking losing ground, KPIs degrading, friction increasing, and worse. But what evidence exists of what that looks like? Everyone asks the adopters what changed for them, but no one asks the non-adopters what happened after they evaluated a PSA and stood pat, navigating the next stage of their journey on tools that many in the organization had worried might not support that journey. No one had asked until now. This work that we've been doing with IDC has been a passion project for me. Nathan knows that. I'm very passionate about this because I know how much PSA advocates and businesses like yours have been struggling to advocate for what's next as buying and change committees and buying and change processes have become more complicated. So I'm really excited to share what we're finding in our ongoing research with IDC that's going to arm you with a way to make a compelling business case for adoption, whether that's first-time adoption or continued adoption. So before I hand over to Nathan, a quick poll just to take the temperature in the room. How capable do you feel articulating the ROI of PSA adoption in a way that would resonate with the CFO? And hopefully this question is applicable to both you if you're a current user of PSA and if you're evaluating PSA. How comfortable, how capable do you feel making that case? So we'll give a moment for people to answer that. And if we have results coming in, why don't we go ahead and share those results? So we're seeing a lot balanced right in the middle. 50% saying somewhat confident. I can explain general benefits, not in numbers a CFO would trust. A few people very confident, a few people more confident, and a few people not confident at all. And I will say from doing success story interviews, from being part of the buying process, this aligns with what I generally see, right? People know that it's driving benefits, that it could drive benefits, but it's hard to put those hard numbers and especially those translated EBITDA-like numbers into action. So we hope we're going to arm people with insights into that. So Nathan, I'm going to hand it over to you to share what we're finding.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Charles. And thank you to Cantata for having me. Really interesting poll. Some real sort of polarization in where we are. I work within IDC's custom solution business. I've probably been in professional services, both working within it and also advising to it and with it for about 25 years. I don't think I've ever seen a situation that's more kind of tempestuous than the one we're in at the moment, whether it's things like inflation or growth uncertainty, whether it's issues around resource or political instability, the impact that things like AI and digital technology are having on talent and access to skills, as well as global competition from other players coming into the market, and the types of requests and requirements coming from customers, whether that's moving to outcome-based contracts or looking for more transparency, or in many ways less tolerance around the kind of delays that were usually expected in the past, as well as all of these digital technologies coming in, particularly around automation and AI, as I mentioned, as well as some of the service combinations that we're seeing for professional service organizations. All of this, as I'm sure everybody on the call is aware, is impacting margin. And it really asks the question, what is it that we can do to approach this and try to address it? A lot of our research points to these kind of core things. If you're going to deal with the environment, you're going to have to be agile moving forward. You're going to have to be able to adapt. If you want the right talent and you want to keep it and attract it, you're going to have to drive engagement. You're going to have to think about the ways in which you bring that talent on board and you keep it. If you want to work better with customers, that's about delivering partnerships. That's about working for co-innovation, bringing them into the hen house in terms of their visibility on projects, and also giving them exactly what it is they want in terms of business model. And if you want to do something about digital, it's about thinking of a platform. And all of these four things and all of the impacts that they had are really critical when we start to look at the business value that was created through our research. This is the highlights from some of 5 organizations that we researched in depth. And you can see already 78% improvement in reporting accuracy, 40% improvement in resource planning. We've got improvements in hiring forecasting, 32% increase in employee satisfaction, as well as on the flip side, reducing things like month-end close, decreasing projects running over, reducing the average time a project takes to complete, as well as de-escalating a lot of the complaints that come in. All of this is from the deployment of the Cantata PSA. And all of this saw, on average, a 16.7% increase in billable hours, which is pretty staggering. Charles, what jumps out for you, just to bring you back in for a moment?
I think what jumps out to me and what I was certainly most excited about when I saw this data for the first time is moving beyond the really important, but I think sometimes stale metrics of just like improvement in billable hours and margin towards things like, how does this impact our customers? How does this impact our employees, right? It's always been fairly obvious that if we're better at running projects, that probably makes our team happier and our customers happier. But what's the direct pass through to those cohorts? And it's always been a bit hard to put a finger on that. And I'm really excited that this research has found a way to, working with these organizations, quantify what that benefit looks like. And then on the flip side that we're going to get to, what the risk looks like when it comes to making our talent happier and feel valued, stick around, when it comes to reducing the number of escalations with our clients, making them more referenceable, right? This is the long-term health of our business. It doesn't, if we improve our utilization by 2%, but it's at the expense of client referenceability and talent retention, that's not a healthy journey to where we're going. So I think that's what really stands out to me, especially as you consider one of the things we made sure with this research is that all 5 of these organizations hadn't been using a PSA before Cantata. So we're really looking at what is that journey from not having one to having one look like. And just to clarify, because we did get a question in the chat, what is a PSA? Professional services automation, commonly understood to be a solution that brings together the aspects of the professional services lifecycle from selling to resourcing to delivery to billing, where those things might otherwise be done in disparate systems. And that's what these businesses did, is unified that under a PSA.
Fantastic. Thank you. Some great observations there. The long and short of it is, in terms of the impacts, that we're looking at that 16.7% increase over time. And that is from this assumed typical performance, so an organization that perhaps wasn't looking at this, but I would ask you just to focus on that, because we're going to come back to that a little bit later on. When we think about the things that really stand out, you can group them together into these key areas. And I think these are the things that sort of we picked up on already in terms of staffing and engagement, but also the efficiencies that can be driven, the accuracy that can be brought into the organization, and also the ability to have more accurate and longer term forecasting. These are definite benefits. And again, these are things that we will look at a little bit later on when we start to look at the flip. Because for all organizations that we have spoken to that have adopted and are seeing the benefits, we also spoke to organizations who had yet to do this. They had considered it, they'd had conversations around it, and senior management and decision makers had often said, things are okay as they are. We're going to carry on. And that was the part that we wanted to investigate, particularly around the hypothesis that a trajectory of decline or problems that existed within the business without intervention will only continue. If you're dealing with something that is okay, will it continue to be okay, or will it continue to erode, particularly around some of the value across the areas that we've just discussed. And the reality is, for the organizations that we spoke to, there was a pretty substantial decline. There was a pretty substantial impact, as one, and Charles mentioned it at the start, referred to as a self-reinforcing death spiral. Now, just as a side, this is a new heavy metal band that Charles and I are creating, so we will be open for auditions a bit later on. But in all seriousness, this is something that is absolutely critical to understand. When you have fragmented data and siloed systems, you're using spreadsheets, you're using a number of different systems like Monday.com or whatever it is, you're going to end up with disconnected understanding and manual reporting. There's no single version of the truth. And that leads in itself to poor forecasting and poor visibility. That in turn creates unclear pipelines, inaccurate utilization. What you end up with is projects having to start without POs, scope creep happening, being forced or being untracked, and a significant amount of lost revenue or even wasted time on projects. That in itself becomes a very inefficient use of your resource, your key people, leading to overstaffing or understaffing, which in itself impacts how people feel about their job, whether they're idle or whether they're overworked, and the likelihood of creating burnout or people just leaving the business. It also creates more manual work in itself, people having to reconcile things, to do manual invoicing. And in turn, that erodes a lot of the profitability and growth. It erodes the money that's available for investment. And it forces management, in every case, to spend much more of their time firefighting, having to do manual invoicing, having to chase money, having to resource projects, rather than focusing on working on the business. That too much of their time is spent in the business and within projects. And that in itself creates, again, a fragmentation of data and siloed systems and an overall resistance to change. There is not the time to spend thinking about how we get better at doing this. Now, when we looked at what was kind of causing this, we came down to these kind of key things, which we called the erosion drivers. Utilization in itself was a big feature of the conversations that we had. The lack of visibility, the type of resources that we had, the periods of underutilization swinging to overutilization and burnout, and in some cases, the inability to really kind of forecast how that was going to change over even a 2-week period, leading to a drop of, from 90% to 60% of utilization. Greater administration, not just for project managers and the time that they spent, in some cases spending a week per month in actually putting together the basic admin to keep the organization moving, but also in terms of the amount of time that's sucked up with actually fee earners being drawn into administrative conversations. We've also got huge amount of variation impact reported, leakage, because it's not really clear what's in and out of scope or how long something was supposed to take. And that leads in itself to that forecast accuracy. We can't really see where we're going to be in 2 weeks, 6 weeks time, let alone next year. And therefore, how do we recruit and how do we resource around that? This in turn leads to employee turnover, and that really drives a level of engagement, which comes through in the way in which clients are serviced and some of the churn that you're likely to get from dissatisfaction. And of course, as I mentioned, and I will continue to mention, strategic decision-making. Without that understanding of the organization and where it is, respondents did not have the ability to make the right decisions. They were making decisions after the fact. They were trying to chase something that had already happened. And the beginning of the month was lost in actually trying to close out the previous month, let alone thinking about driving as much utilization and as much cash flow as possible. It's all of these things built up. But what we have to remember is that for every kind of cost associated with this, there is, because of the business that we're in, a lost revenue. And each of these things is, two sides of the same coin. If we think about utilization, this is often an issue because there's a cost because you're paying people potentially to sit around, but at the same time, you're losing out on revenue. They're a perishable good. They can't get that time back. And that is therefore a loss happening on both sides. Variation impact is, having to add more work or more resource, but at the same time, you're losing out on that additional revenue that you could have won. Employee turnover, there's an obvious direct cost there in terms of the cost of actually hiring somebody, searching for them, and then upskilling and onboarding them. But at the same time, you're losing out on that window where you didn't have the resource to drive the revenue of that part of your business. In each of these cases, we're therefore able to think about this in terms of numbers. So direct costs, you can think about idle time. You can think about, as I mentioned, the direct costs of replacement and the disruption to the business from employee turnover. But at the same time, you can think about what's the lost knowledge impact in terms of lost revenue? What is it in terms of the customer satisfaction, the client engagement that I'm losing by having that churn in employees? And how much does that lose me in terms of revenues when it comes to lost business? A lot of the direct cost from margin loss in terms of strategic decision making is also at the same time lost revenue because of delays in invoicing, because of delays in projects, because of the delays in the decisions being made to pursue other emerging areas of opportunity. We have and are still working on putting this into a calculation. This will allow you to put in a number of different areas, and we will therefore be looking at what is it if I do nothing in comparison to if I do something and focus in on this. And again, it focuses on both sides of the equation and really gets into a deep understanding of the impact that this has on organizations. All of the time, we have to come back to this point that these erosion drivers are leaking cost across organizations, and they are interrelated. And all of the time, these interrelated elements are creating lost revenue. And this is accumulative. Something in itself, maybe on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, such as client churn, probably seems okay. We've got a leaky bucket, but that's normal. We've always had that. But then add that to the cost of replacement and onboarding, add that to the lost revenue, add that to the underutilization. All of this starts to add up. And the result is that assumed typical performance that I mentioned at the beginning is always going to be pulled down by these erosion drivers. You're always going to be battling to keep pace with the status quo, to stay at 0.0. And I don't think many organizations understand that that could be absorbing a vast amount of effort as well as resource to just keep standing still. But it also suggests that everything is static. It suggests that, okay, the status quo is the status quo. If we do nothing, we'll be in the same place that we were yesterday or last year. And really, really, it's not. I mean, if any industry is not static, it is this one. People costs over the next 5 years can increase, 15, 25%. And that's probably before you start looking at very specific skill sets around certain technologies and certain focus areas that are of interest. Technology costs always continue to increase. You've got inflation, but you've also got the complexity of deployment. Facilities costs, regulatory and compliance and keeping up to date, the cost of actually selling into these organizations, as well as some of the training and reskilling costs. All of this adds up to the fact that you have a shifting baseline. And I will hand back to Charles.
Yeah, so I want to bring back the visualization, the sort of crossroads we looked at earlier, right? This organizational bottleneck that, if left untampered with, will continue to constrain performance and keep us at quote unquote the status quo. Nathan just raised a really critical point that I think we need to factor into our business cases, which is even if the status quo involves foregoing benefits, we're not going to get the 8% or the 16% improvement in utilization, but we'll be where we are. And that's a big if, right? That we're not going to incur additional costs and risks. Staying put costs something in an industry that isn't staying put. So if you move to the next slide, right? Like the old baseline that looked good relative to your status quo, if you stay where you are, the new baseline, as others move around you and embrace PS 2.0 and position themselves ahead of you, doesn't look so good. So keeping that in mind, but also moving to the next slide, thinking about the net impact of an action. This is just another way of illustrating what Nathan was showing earlier. We need to think about this idea that the perceived status quo is not necessarily what the status quo is going to be. Our job when building a business case or an ROI is to paint the picture as best as we can of those diverging paths. 2 years from now, where do we need to be? Where will we be if we don't fix this? And factoring in the erosion that will come from that, the red. And we'll talk tomorrow with SPI about the idea of getting the red out. And then on the flip side, if we adopt this, then we can factor in all these benefits I'm hearing about from reference customers and from industry research that adopting a PSA would unlock. Put together and factoring in the baseline, that is what our total opportunity cost is going to look like. All of which brings me back to the idea of, we need to articulate what those missed opportunities and compounding costs and risks are going to look like, because that's integral to overcoming the things that tend to stand in the way when budgets are so precious of investing in change, right? There are all these biases that exist, and these biases are exacerbated by the kind of communal approach to buying or to change management, like loss aversion and the bias towards errors of omission over errors of commission, right? People are biased towards, I'm not going to get fired over not making a decision, even if that decision led to bad outcomes or didn't unlock something, but I will get fired if I make a decision and it leads to bad outcomes. So I'm not going to make a decision. And that's what feeds the no decision mentality. And in order to combat that, right, we need to understand as best we can, based on the research that surrounds us, what that actual status quo might look like for our business and what optimal performance look like. So we're going to paint that picture and we're going to help combat those biases. So if we move to kind of wrapping things up, I want to encourage people to participate in the next phase of this research. Available today, the new research on the value of PSA adoption based on conversations with Cantata customers is out. It's on our website. Go check it out. Coming soon, the research that Nathan has been talking about, a bold new approach to understanding what business value erosion looks like, right? They had conversations with businesses that evaluated PSA, but ended up staying the course. It's going to outline the impacts of scaling a services business without the technology in place to support sustainable growth and scale. And then ongoing research, we're still doing research around this. We have an active survey out there that IDC is running. So if you've adopted a PSA for the first time within the last 5 years, or if you've evaluated adopting PSA recently, but you haven't adopted it yet, go ahead and use that QR code on the screen. It will take you right to IDC's survey. We want to encourage people to participate in this and help add some robustness to this research that we're working on with IDC. And then a few more QR codes before we wrap things up. If you go to the next slide, we want to encourage people to join Cantata's community and join Cantata Stars. So go ahead and use your QR codes on the screen if you haven't yet to join in on those experiences and share the experiences that you're having with Cantata. If we go to the next slide, I answered the question that I saw come in about PSA. I don't see any others at this time. So considering we have about a minute left in this session, I want to tell everyone what our next sessions are going to be. So Nathan, if you go to the next slide, don't miss out on what's coming next. Our last sessions for the day, we're splitting up into 2 breakouts. So we have one breakout for Cantata SX, and that's about e-invoicing made easy, your Cantata SX game plan for seamless ELR compliance with Avalara. And for Cantata OX customers, we have a breakout, powerful new workflow capabilities, resetting what is possible in PSA, which is our whole goal here, is helping you understand what's possible with PSA and help you articulate what you can do next with it. So last slide, I want to say thank you to everyone for joining and for being here with us for a really exciting Converge. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.